Well, good evening and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So, the state of the equity capital markets, equity investments, debt capital markets in COVID-19 have been something that everyone has been interested in, and the markets have been doing well. And so I wanted to check in on what about private investments. And so it was announced a couple of weeks ago that Rachel Zimmer has launched a fairly major-sized equity fund in Toronto. And so I wanted to check in and find out what exactly is going on. So Rachel, how are you? Welcome to our show.
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Brian. Really excited to be here today.
Thank you so much. So tell me, you are Canadian born and bred. You had a firm in Toronto. You sold it, and you've now started this fund. Is that correct?
Yeah, you got it. So I started an enterprise SaaS company back in 2014, bootstrapped, scaled, exited to a portfolio company of Onyx, so the private equity firm here that's based in Toronto. I'm very, very excited to be on the other side of things now. I'm trying to help bring investment into the Canadian market, put more money into the hands of Canadians, create more Canadian jobs, and ultimately just drive innovation with the amazing talent that we have here locally. Fantastic.
And who are your backers?
So we're backed by some pretty significant investors. We were started out of the UK. Our fund is 140 million globally, and we're backed by like Reid Hoffman, one of the co-founders of LinkedIn, Greylock Partners. We've got many different venture partners, including Alex Norman here locally in Toronto, who will be coaching and mentoring our startups, amongst many, many others. So it's a very large breadth of investors within that fund.
Excellent. And are you associated with Mars or any of the other entrepreneurially oriented entities in Toronto here?
Yeah, we have a great partnership with Mars. Mars is actually where we're hosting our kickoff weekend for our program. So essentially what the program does is we bring 50 people together twice a year of extraordinary individuals that we think have the potential to be future CEOs or CTOs. We bring them together twice a year. We help them find their co-founder and then come up with ideas, and then we ultimately invest in them. So Mars is obviously a really great partner in our program because they're such a core anchor in our ecosystem, whereby they're trying to help drive Canadian innovation. So when we shared that we were launching, Mars has been an absolutely fantastic partner. Where, as I shared, they're going to be launching helping us launch at the end of this month.
So this is really startup companies that you're interested in, not companies that have developed for a while at all.
Oh, and to that point, it's actually not even companies. We're interested in pre-company, pre-idea, which is, it sounds crazy to most people, but we actually look for the person and the individual, not for companies. And really the thesis is that if you can find that extraordinary person that has an innate drive to achieve, they challenge convention, they can command followership, and they're technically minded, if you can find that individual, the rest will take care of itself.
Really? So pre-company, pre-idea, you're investing behind the people.
Correct. So and what we mean by investing in the people is these 50 individuals, we actually pay them a stipend to quit their jobs. So that's how invested we are. And it's a no strings attached. We believe in you. Please join because we want you to take a chance on yourself, and we're here to support you doing that. So we give folks 3,500 Canadian per month while they meet their co-founders, while they kind of generate and incubate those ideas. At the end of those 3 months, that's when they pitch their idea to us, very much like Dragon's Den. And we have the choice to invest 100K Canadian in exchange for 10% of their company. And so that's where, after that second stage, we then really help to propel and get companies through our platform. And we've got some amazing success stories. We've been around for 9 years in 5 other markets. And we've had over 2,500 people go through the program, 300 companies created, 11 sizable exits, and the biggest and most valuable companies actually are still operational today and in the portfolio. So it is a successful model that I'm just so thrilled to be launching here in Canada.
So this model has worked in the UK, obviously.
So yeah, so we're in London, Berlin, Paris, Singapore, and Bangalore. And Toronto, which is so cool for Canada. Toronto is the 6th location before the US, before many other European markets, which I think just speaks to the hotbed of really incredible talent that we have here locally.
What a fascinating story, and what an interesting opportunity. We're chatting with Rachel Zimmer, who's launched a new fund. What's the fund called, by the way?
Entrepreneur First.
Entrepreneur First in Canada. We're going to take a break and be joined by one of her partners, Bogdan, and I can't pronounce his last name, so we're going to have to get him to help me with the pronunciation before I introduce him. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us, and we'll come right back.
Yeah, Knezovic.
Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. We're chatting with Rachel Zimmer and now joined by Bogdan Knezovic. The two of them are together forming this Entrepreneur First, that's correct, Entrepreneur First venture fund, which I didn't realize, but it's really not what I would describe as a venture fund. It's almost like a, I don't know what it's, your pre-company, pre-idea, providing a stipend to people to leave their jobs so that they can create companies. It sounds absolutely fascinating. Bogdan, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to join this Entrepreneur First entity?
Yeah, for sure. So I come more, thanks for having us, by the way, Brian. Good to be here. But I come from more of a technical background. So I recently completed my PhD over at the University of Oxford. I did that in the field of genomics and statistics. And I've also had, over the last several years, different kinds of exposure to the startup world, both on the side of the early stage teams, working at a biotech company that I joined, and they were only 5 people and they've since IPO'd, as well as on the kind of investment diligence side. So as I was wrapping up my graduate school, I was looking to come back to Toronto, which is where I grew up, and really wanted to figure out a way to plug back into the ecosystem here, find ways to really make waves here in Toronto, in the tech scene in particular. And I found out that EF was launching this office in Toronto. So that was a really exciting opportunity for me to contribute in some way, immediately coming off my kind of graduate school as well as startup experience prior.
Fascinating. And Rachel, other than your SaaS startup, tell us a little bit about your background if you could.
Yeah, for sure. So my SaaS company that I mentioned before was an amazing experience where we brought meaningful work to freelancers in over 150 cities around the world. And really my motivation is creating jobs. So that was the motivation behind building 5Crowd, again, bringing that meaningful work around the world. And then now, my passion is really around enabling entrepreneurs. I've done that for the last 2 years as an entrepreneur in residence at the DMZ. So I've coached over 50 startups there across a variety of industries. And then now really fortunate and excited to be doing this with EF. On the personal front, I love rock climbing. I've taken 3 travel sabbaticals. I'm one of those people that pushes really, really hard and then chills and takes a break in between things. And overall, I'm just a really proud Canadian around the tech ecosystem. When I think back on the last 10 years from when I was thinking of starting a company till now, it's a totally different world, right? So, 10 years ago, we didn't have the tech TOs, the meetups, a lot of the tech programs like the DMZs in existence, right? And so when you look at where we are today, where you have firms like Entrepreneur First choosing to launch in Canada before the US, I think it's just such a huge pride moment for us.
Do you think we have a good startup ecosystem?
I mean, I'd love to hear Bogdan's thoughts on this. From my perspective, I think there's strengths and weaknesses. I think on the strengths, we have amazing talent and amazing clients to test and learn with. So Canada is such a great launch market because within an hour radius of the GTA, you can meet with like 90% of the multinationals globally because everyone has an office along the DVP or 401. So when you look at that proximity, it's really, really powerful. So from a client, customer discovery standpoint, from a talent standpoint, I think we're almost second to none. I think on areas where we maybe aren't as strong as some other areas, and it's a bit stereotypical to Canadians, we're definitely more risk averse. Right. So when it comes to the investment side of things, we look for detailed traction, very clear proof in unit economics, with far higher expectations than in some other markets where I'm going to be facetious here, but maybe in Silicon Valley, I've spent quite a bit of time down there. We have a coffee conversation, draw an idea on a napkin, $10 million valuation, boom, check written. And so obviously I'm being facetious in that description, but the Canadian conservatism and, litmus test to make sure that we kick the tires before we get going. I mean, that could be a weakness, or it could just be, that we really make sure that, something truly has traction before we get going. So it's a nuance of the Canadian market that, is just something to be maneuvered. Bogdan, any other thoughts from your end?
Yeah, I would just double down on that technical talent part, which is, I think that's why the main decision to open in Toronto was such a, I guess, obvious one to the team in London. Is we look for where highly technically competent and ambitious people are, and especially if you look at in general the fields of AI and machine learning. A lot of the fundamental research coming out of Montreal, coming out of University of Toronto, just bodes well for kind of that necessary technical layer of future companies. And I think that's where Toronto's and Canada's advantage lies, as well as I think in general, from what I hear of kind of the global stance that Canada has at these larger conferences about kind of commercializing research and about just general approach to artificial intelligence in particular. I hear that like our government is very active and very thoughtful about how to incorporate that in the more day-to-day, how to kind of avoid future obstacles by being very proactive in their thinking. And I think that's really important for like a long-term tech ecosystem.
So these things we hear about Google and Facebook and Amazon and people coming to Waterloo, stealing our best people and taking them all back to the West Coast of the United States. Is that not true?
So I think that that brain drain is definitely something that's present, especially in my time. Half of my friends from like high school went into the co-op programs at Waterloo and then went to the States. But we're seeing a bit of that reverse brain drain, I think. We're seeing a lot of like what happens when things go completely unchecked and what happens when there's unrealistic valuations in companies around the world where money is just pouring in and expectations are not being met. And so I think that kind of, to Rachel's point, the Canadian mindset of let's like maybe hold the horses a bit here and let's make sure that there's something tangible there first, and let's like walk a bit before we run. I think that's resulting in a lot of people looking for opportunities to come back to Canada, where standard of living is incredible, where the kind of lifestyle around just being in the grind of an entrepreneur is maybe more attractive. And so I'm personally quite optimistic for the future of Canada beyond like the brain drain that happened in the last 10 years.
In Waterloo, they have these funders and founders networking sessions where people that have money and people that want money that have got good companies and ideas already get going seem to work really well. And I haven't seen or heard of those similar kind of events in Toronto. Is that to suggest that Toronto is more sort of institutional and Kitchener-Waterloo is more entrepreneurial?
That's interesting, Brian. I think in the last 5 years, Toronto, there's definitely been a shift where, Waterloo, to your point, was the hub, the epicenter where a lot of that conversation was happening. But in the last 5 years, we've had the rise of the tech TOs, the DMZs, the tech stars that have come, the Excella prizes that have come. And so I think the shift of having angels really come out very loudly in the ecosystem, plus also institutional investors through those platforms, has absolutely risen. Now, I still think there's a long way to go. So we've made huge moves over the last 5 years, but are we a Silicon Valley or a New York or a London yet? We still have room to grow, right? And I think the gap, to Bogdan's point, isn't the talent side. It's really about having that support. And one area of support that I think we could be doing more of, the government does a lot of really great things for later stage companies, whether it's SHRED, so the research and development tax credit, whether it's IRAP, so the grants that help, again, propel innovation. But there's some other markets that are a bit more bullish, further upstream on innovation. And so I'd say, I see less differences between the Torontos and the Waterloos of the world, and more when you look at the government level. There's some really fantastic things that we do later stage, but there is some opportunity to maybe move further upstream, maybe not all the way to the pre-idea phase, but perhaps, into that first 1 to 2 years to help bolster that innovation and get things going.
Rachel, let's take a step back for a second. Can you explain what a SHRED and an IRAP are?
Yeah, for sure. And don't hold me to the acronym, but SHRED is a research and development tax credit. I'm not a tax expert, but essentially how it works is if you're making progress in the Canadian innovation and ecosystem, you can work with with tax professionals to essentially have support from the government to build your technology. And so there's a lot of documentation that would go with that. But what it does is for a later stage company that is making advances in research and development, you can get really great government subsidies essentially to do that. So that's what Shred is. And then IRAP is a grant program that the government has, whereby if you're working on specific technology-based projects, you can outline what your project is, share what the intent is for it to drive impact in your business from a technology standpoint. And you can basically apply to get a grant. And so the government's really, really great at focusing on those R&D and innovation advances, but again, for those later stage companies. And so those types of programs, I believe, are only available, if you've been around for a few years, whereas in some other countries, for example, in Europe, such as Germany and France, there's a little bit more incentive right out the gate to help provide support to folks willing to take the risk early on.
So in other words, you're saying that governments have got good programs, but they're not early stage enough.
Correct.
Okay. So what do we need to do?
I mean, let's get early stage, right? And so I think there's a lot of different, I'm not a policy expert by any means, but I think, recognizing that that's something that we want to do to really ignite the hotbed of talent that we have, supporting and partnering with programs like Entrepreneur First that are early stage is one path. And then I think there's a lot of, if we chose to make that bet and invest further upstream, there's a lot of different policy and tax and different pieces that could be great solutions. But again, not a policy expert.
So the Waterloo Accelerator, the Communitech entity, I don't know whether it's called the McMaster Innovation something or other, but there's an innovation center down in Hamilton and McMaster. And in fact, some of the Mars said that money was important, but what also was critically important is that people had an opportunity to work together, access other skills that might be available, and they made them available from a finance, from a marketing standpoint, and also cheap rent. So are there other things that you think need to add into this mix to create these successful entrepreneurial ventures?
Well, I'll kick it off, and Bogdan, feel free to pipe in. I think, building a successful company takes customers. Stating the obvious, but it takes really good early stage customers. And when I think back to, the success of my company, when I co-founded it with my partner, Brian, we had early stage customers that were willing to take a bet and be founding clients of ours. And they included Johnson & Johnson, Labatt, TELUS, CIBC, and we were very fortunate that we happened to be talking to the right parts of the organizations. But that took a lot of time, right? And I think the more that the private sector can also recognize, hey, we need to see innovation, and hey, by the way, putting up our hand, here's where we need the help, and actually outlining, here's where we need some support. I think that's really where the innovators, the entrepreneurs can be married up with potential customers to actually drive very recognized and identified problems with the right innovators to pair that with solutions. So I think there's a lot of ways that can be done, but it's really that the innovators in the private sector that I think partnering with the startup community, that's really where we're going to see tremendous traction.
How do you create that? How do you create those connections with the established companies?
So I think there's some programs out there. Highline Beta is a great one where they're a fund, they're an incubator, and they actually have programs that they invite corporates to, where they basically say, hey, tell us your problems and we'll happily try and help you find enterprises, or startup funders, that can help solve some of those problems. But I don't think that's enough. Highline's fantastic. Marcus Daniels is great, who's the MD there, is fantastic, but we need that thinking that Marcus has led everywhere versus in one program. And I think one group that does this really, really well, Deloitte has a program called Boost. And essentially what they do is they bring all their high potentials internally and work on pro bono consulting projects within the ecosystem, but it's also an eye to scouting innovation for them. So I think we need more programs like that and innovators within corporate to recognize the problems and to try and take the initiative to bridge the gap between private and the startup ecosystem.
Is Entrepreneur First going to be doing anything in that regard to induce that kind of connection?
Absolutely. I think, we believe that the founders in our program own their own outcomes. So we're not going to be handholding and helping to set up those customers. At the end of the day, the founders in the program need to be driving their companies forward. However, we are, a team that's literally incentivized and dedicated to making sure that these individuals succeed. And so what that means is you've got myself, you've got Bogdan, you've got two of our venture partners, Milada Lacoze, who's a multiple exit entrepreneur, Alex Norman, who's the founder of a key partner at AngelList, and has invested in dozens of companies over the last year and a half. So you've got an army of people that are dedicated and willing to help, and absolutely, like, we will be happily bridging the gap between corporate relationships as well as the startups we have.
And what about my comment about access to different services like marketing services and financial services and cheap rent and things like that? Is something that you're going to be involved in, or no, that's up to your founders to try to figure out?
So we do provide lots of support. So we've got partners like Fasken, who's an amazing law firm who has been already too good to the founders coming into our cohort. We've had quite a few people stuck outside of our borders. And we've had individuals where, partners like Fasken have really helped to make sure that we get top talent, supported and physically into the country, especially when, the visas and so on are actually set up. So I'd say that's one thing. So, whether it's legal support, whether it's marketing, coaching, and guidance, to your point on cheap rent, we do have relationships, whether it's with the Mars or the OCE, now 111. So we do have relationships there. But at the end of the day, we've recruited people to the cohort that are going to be scrappy, resourceful, resilient individuals that find a way, right? So as much as we'll have areas where they can pull from us, they need to be the ones doing that, pulling that, and then driving their businesses forward. Again, one of the key reasons that we look at that drive to achieve, because it's so, so key in seeing that success in an entrepreneur.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say, the only thing I'd add to that, I think, is two things. One is on the kind of leaning on the 9 years of experience that EF has, and the fact that we have locations in multiple cities around the world is a big advantage. So we do have kind of, I was on a call earlier today actually to sort out programming throughout the next several weeks that different key partners, whether they're venture partners or EIRs that we have in different sites, can deliver some of this core content for the founders, especially in the early stages as they're thinking about what tools are at their disposal. So that's one thing that we do have. We're fortunate to be able to lean on that. And then the other is, I think, even just how we think of cohort composition and how we think of in enticing different co-founders to pair up, which is this idea of understanding who in our cohort of 50 or 60 individuals is highly technical and is really an expert or a master in a specific technique or in a specific domain, versus who is more commercially minded and has had experience leading technical teams or working on the sales side of technical products, but isn't a technical person themselves, and just doing everything we can to encourage those kinds of pairwise interactions where the early co-founding team is as robust for the future as possible. And that, I think, puts more into the hands of the entrepreneurs to be able to drive forward what they need to upskill on, because they're not just a technical team or just a commercial team. They're kind of a blend of the two.
We're chatting tonight with Rachel Zimmer and Bogdan Knesik of Entrepreneurs First. We're going to take a break for some messages and come right back and hear more about how we get the entrepreneurial environment going in Canada. Stay with us. Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. Having, I think, an interesting conversation with Rachel Zimmer and Bogdan Knesik of Entrepreneurs First. As some of you may know, I've been involved in a couple of pharmaceutical and biotech startups. And so it's really quite interesting hearing how Rachel and Bogdan want to get high potential people financed pre-company, pre-idea. And, it's interesting because I've had the pleasure, honor, challenge, et cetera, of going into different venture capital companies, different private equity companies. And a lot of the focus is on the idea, particularly if it's a pharmaceutical or biotech. There's often a master's of science, if not a PhD in something or other, that's on the other side of the table that's going through the product idea in incredible amount of detail. Not nearly as much attention on the people. And so what you're saying is that based on Entrepreneur First experience, and success, high potential people are the key.
Yeah,
how do you find those high potential people and describe those high potential people to me, if you could?
Sounds good. So we find them in a number of ways, and I'll kind of break them down into two groups. So we look for CEO potentials and then CTO potentials. On the CEO potentials, we're looking for hungry, driven folks that have not yet proven themselves. And what I mean by that is, or what we mean by that, is they've got an amazing track record where they've got a crazy drive to achieve. They challenge convention, maybe make untraditional decisions, but they have not yet made it, so to speak. They haven't built a $100 million company, but they've got that aspiration and ambition to do so. And the motivations can be manifold. It could be an underdog situation where they want to, demonstrate that they're able to kind of turn things around and kind of show their abilities to do it. It could be motivations to protect their family long term and make sure they've got the financial stability and freedom to do so. So that's a bit about the CEO side. And then the CTO side, we do look for folks that have a PhD, perhaps that have graduated in the last 2 years. So they've got recent, very on the cusp, forward thinking technology skills that are ready to be commercialized. So someone that has recently, made a breakthrough and then wants to take that to market. How we find them, it's our secret sauce, but I will say there's a couple key things. One is we actually do targeted outreaches. So we'll look at individuals' profiles. It speaks to the importance of a LinkedIn profile, but we definitely look and see, okay, do they have X, Y, and Z attributes, and is that something that would be a good fit? So that's kind of one where we do targeted outreach. And then on the flip side, we've actually, it's fascinating. So we've been in Canada now, we're launching our first cohort this September, and we have had almost 1,000 applications for just one cohort without much media or press or marketing coverage. So I think it speaks to that hunger and interest that already kind of percolates within the Canadian ecosystem of wanting to be an entrepreneur and then seeing a platform like this to join.
Fantastic. Bogdan, you said you had 9 cities already. Where are they?
Just a little under 9, but we have London, Bangalore, Singapore, Paris, Berlin, and Toronto now.
Fascinating. And how long have they been around in the different cities? All recent or some of them longer?
So London was the first in 2011. Singapore followed a few years later. And then I'm not sure about the exact timing, but Berlin, Paris, Bangalore were all within a couple of years, and Toronto the most recent.
You talk, Rachel, about getting people that have just graduated with a PhD. So are you locating close to universities, or what's your sense of location?
So we are based here in Toronto, but interestingly, we've seen, and Bogdan, you might know the numbers a bit better than me on this, we actually have a number of people choosing to move to Toronto from other cities in Canada. So we have people moving from Calgary, we have folks that are Canadians that are moving back from California or from Asia and actually choosing to relocate into Toronto with the program of EF. So even though, we've got some great academic institutions in Kingston and Montreal and London, so to speak, or Calgary even, we've got a great reputation out there. Toronto is really the central place that we're recruiting and having the program launched.
I saw this fascinating presentation by a PhD in intellectual property. And in most cities around the world, intellectual property identified by patents is concentrated around universities, post-secondary institutions. In Toronto, it's concentrated around the airport. And the hypothesis from this individual's thesis was that really the airport in Toronto ends up being the sort of magnet or creator of innovation. And part of it is what you identified, Rachel, is that there's so many subsidiaries, Canadian head office of US, American, British, European, whatever subsidiaries that are located there. And they do end up putting a lot of money into startups. And it almost suggests that therefore, when you think about entrepreneurialism and innovation in Toronto, it's not necessarily down near Mars that you want to be focused on. It's maybe up around all the subs on Pill Hill and the technology base in Mississauga, Brampton, Markham, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's spot on, that it doesn't necessarily have to be really close to a university. I think what we really encourage in all our founders is to be based in the Toronto area. The main hypothesis there being that the more in-person touch points you can have with a potential co-founder, especially in those critical early several weeks of figuring out what problem to be working on and why it's the right co-founder to be doing that with, the more productive you can be as a team. But we don't kind of prescribe where they necessarily have to be like located within Toronto, or even longer term, if it makes sense for their business to be closer to the airport or in another city or even in another country, then we actually encourage that. So we do have companies that have started in other cohorts that are moving across seas in both directions. And we really want to encourage the entrepreneurs to kind of figure out what's best for their business, depending on what that business is.
You talked about how people are moving to Toronto to join your operation, if not just to become entrepreneurial. The former head of McKinsey that is supposedly advising our prime minister said that immigration and easier access to visas could be, particularly given President Donald Trump's restrictions in the United States, could be a key success factor to Canadian innovation and growth in the future. And he encouraged open immigration, particularly of entrepreneurially oriented people. Do you agree?
I think so. Rachel, I don't know what your stance is on this, but I think when we were looking at the challenges of launching a cohort in Toronto in the middle of a pandemic, there was obviously a gut reaction of like, are we going to be able to do this? Like, what's it going to look like? Are our numbers going to suffer? People maybe don't want to travel. People maybe don't want to take risks. But for every risk that we could come up with, or every potential hurdle, there was some other advantage. And the one, Brian, that you just highlighted, I think is an obvious one, where there are a lot of people that had potential job offers, very lucrative job offers elsewhere, and then realized like, maybe actually this is the right time to be based in Canada, where I am, supported and very welcome, and maybe this is the right time to take that plunge and take that risk. So we are seeing, we were oversubscribed with our cohort. We set out to have 50 people. We're over 50. So everything is indicating that it is still a great place and a great time to be doing this. Rachel, I don't know if there's something to add there.
I think the big headline, as we reflect on this, and we've thought about immigration in different pieces, but I think at the end of the day, we believe that a disproportionate share of the next decade's deep tech giants will be built in Canada. We have the talent here already. We have the research labs. We've got the Milas, the U of Ts, the Waterloos, and we have such great institutions here. And I think just being really thoughtful, where if we have folks that are attending those institutions, how do we make sure, and they're investing in Canada, living here, how do we make sure that we can have those folks, actually stay and build companies, right? So I'm not sure the specifics of what those immigration policies should be, but I do think being strategic and thoughtful about it, especially with so many changes that are coming and have come in 2020, is important. So I think it's great that this former McKinsey head is advising and being thoughtful. I think at least having the conversation, step one, and just weighing out the pros and cons to be really thoughtful about making sure we keep jobs in the hands of Canadians is absolutely key.
Rachel, is there a role, a desire to have more females in innovation?
Oh gosh, it's a great question, and I'll share that it's a challenge for us. So specifically myself being a female in tech, it's been painful because we've been recruiting for our cohort, and we have 15% of our cohort is female. And that's about average to what it is in the rest of the EF community, which actually over indexes versus deep tech as a whole. And so when you think about the challenges that females go through, as they're choosing between life decisions, family decisions, and then starting companies, I think we've got a lot of work to do societally to make sure that people are supported and have the same opportunities to be able to participate and drive innovation. So I think you're asking a question that is near and dear to my heart, and any females that are listening, that if you've always thought about entering into the tech world, driving innovation, take the plunge. Why not, right? It's if not you, then who? And I just hope that if we keep having the conversation, hopefully we'll start making traction.
I'm not sure if you're aware of a after school called the Knowledge Society, TKS. I interviewed some of them a couple of months ago. And the majority of the class, I know these are high school students, but very involved in tech, very intelligent young people. The majority of the class were female. So you may want to reach down even lower than post-secondary. That's a good prompt. That's a very good prompt. Thank you for that. I also just interviewed the new chair of neuroscience, neurology at U of T. In all of U of T's history, first female chair. of the department, neurosurgery, and very impressive. And what she talks about is how you have to have your own passion, but have other people that inspire that passion and help you along with that passion. And that passion ends up being the most important thing that you've got in life.
I agree.
Okay, so let's talk about getting money. I've had to go out and get money. And if I go to Silicon Valley, to what's it called, Menlo Park, I think it's called, there's so many different offices that I could go to with venture capital and or institutional people that have got lots of money. In Toronto, you just don't have that. Do we have a problem? We just don't have enough people that are lending out, investing out money in Canada as of yet?
Man, it's a great prompt. I think there's a lot of hidden money. There's a lot of money in Canada, right? There's a lot of, unofficial angels that when you find the right strategic angel, there's fantastic alignment. So I think there's, that's kind of comment one of the underground and non-institutional funds that can be very, very strategic for many companies to take. And then the second thing I'd say is that we share a border with the U.S. And in this specific instance, it's a good thing, right? Because we can very easily have proximity to that institutional funds that are maybe a little bit more risk tolerant. We're on the same time zone, and so even though some folks might not sit in Canada, there's no reason that you can't, to your point, actually raise in the Valley or other places in the U.S. where you can get access to that capital.
There's a fairly important venture capital study that you may be aware of that showed that 75% of the investments made by major venture capital companies in North America were made with companies that were within a half day's drive time for where their location was. So yes, we share a border with the United States, but a lot of VCs want to invest in companies that are close by, whether it's because they know the people, whether they have recommendations that the people are good people, whether it's because when there's an emergency they need to drive down and get on a board meeting right away. Proximity seems to be one of the key success factors. And that's probably one of the reasons why so many people do go with their ideas off to Silicon Valley or to San Diego if it's biotech, or to New Jersey if it's pharmaceutical, et cetera. So how do we combat that?
Yeah, I think there's a few leading indicators. I'll share two anecdotes that give me confidence on that front. One is Y Combinator, so the very popular incubator out of San Fran. Over the last several years, the vast majority of a lot of the companies they've admitted have actually been focused in emerging markets. So even though it's based out of San Fran, a lot of the investments have actually been flowing outside of the U.S. ecosystem, which I think is a really positive sign, where you see a really forward-thinking and leading platform like that starting to lean outside. And then a small entrepreneur first anecdote. So I mentioned the two venture partners that we have that are angel investors, also successfully exited entrepreneurs. And Milad Alakoze, who is one of our venture partners, he's based in the US, and he is choicefully wanting to build his personal bridges with Canada because he sees the hotbed of talent in Canada, and he believes a disproportionate number of the next unicorns are actually going to be built here. So we're seeing more and more Milads. Had a call earlier this week with someone quite similar to him, just raised a $50 million fund, who's actually trying to actively build the bridge to the talent that we have here in Canada. So to your point, I think that study pre-COVID is absolutely something that we can't ignore the facts, but I think there are some really good leading indicators that at least give me confidence that the spotlight's on Canada. There's interest from forward-thinking folks to lean in here, and at the same time, it's up to the driven entrepreneurs that we have to find a way. Right at the end of the day, that is what entrepreneurship is, like breaking down doors and trying to basically solve that problem.
Rachel, you used another term that other people are familiar with. Could you explain what a unicorn is, please?
Oh, man. Yes. A unicorn, I'd say it's like the slam dunk, fully scaled tech giant, right? And so I don't know what the formal definition of it would be, but maybe, they've hit the $100 million mark and are fully operating on their own. How would you describe it? Have I nailed it, or how would you describe a unicorn?
I thought a unicorn was something that didn't go public until it was over $1 billion valuation. But the point being, big companies, big tech companies. Bogdan, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, I was going to add, Rachel, you brought up a really, I don't know if you intentionally said it or inadvertently, but you said pre-COVID, the study being pre-COVID. And I think we're actually in a very interesting experiment right now where we're challenging a lot of the norms that we've had. Even EF looking at how pre-COVID, how often people would fly around to attend these different investment meetings within EF. And now all of that is done virtually. And all of a sudden, what we thought was absolutely necessary, which is in-person, face-to-face relationship building, we're now forced to maybe reconsider, to maybe reduce the amount of interactions we have. And all of a sudden, I think we're in a place where we're having to challenge the notion that you have to be there in person. And I think this will be an interesting social experiment to see play out, whether that actually results in maybe a flow out of Silicon Valley in terms of where investors are looking. Because I think, Brian, to your point, the reality was that if you were in Menlo Park, you could walk down the street and like walk into an investor's office, and then you can walk another half block and walk to another investor's office, and you can just schedule all your meetings that way. Whereas now people are using Zoom, people are scheduling meetings like this, and I think it's becoming more normalized. So I'd be curious to see whether this holds up in the coming years on that front.
You know, I agree with you completely. It's going to be a really interesting social experiment. Some of the studies that I've seen, you probably have heard these as well, is that one of the things that we've lost, we've gained potentially productivity because people show up on time and the meetings start on time and they end on time. What we have lost potentially is the chit chat as you walk into the meeting, as you wait for the meeting to start, during a break, after the meeting, et cetera, where you get to know people. You get to know them as real people. And so we may be more productive. We may actually be communicating, but do we get to know people? And if you're making multi-million-dollar bets on some of these people, you got to get to know them a little bit. So I think it'll be an interesting, it will be a very interesting social experiment. Anyway, we're chatting tonight with Rachel Zimmer and Bogdan Knefik of Entrepreneurs First. We're going to take a break and come back with some final comments in just a second. Stay with us. Well, what a fascinating discussion tonight with Rachel Zimmer and Bogdan Knefik of Entrepreneurs First. I'm sorry, Bogdan, I have probably mispronounced your last name 5 different ways, 5 different times, but I'm trying. We're talking about fascinating, high potential people that Rachel and Bogdan want to find and invest behind before they even have a company, before they have an idea, because they're convinced that Toronto and Canada is going to be one of the centers for tech development in the future, and they want to be part of financing that. Maybe I could ask you, think about someone that's in university today. They don't have that PhD you talked about yet, but they dream of being the type of person that's going to be invited to be one of your cohorts. What recommendations have you got for them and what they should be doing right now to get ready to be one of your high potential people?
Great question, Brian. I think it depends on, to our earlier point, on what persona type they are. Are they the commercial facing or the technical facing co-founder? And I think if you're more on the commercial side, I think it's really showing a thirst for knowledge and showing a thirst to understand how is value created and captured within tech broadly. Where are there going to be opportunities? How can you demonstrate that you are able to handle those ideas, to work with those technical teams, exposing yourself in different ways and demonstrating that you have that kind of drive and that urge to really be at that forefront. And conversely, I think on the kind of more technical side, it's really getting an appreciation for how can you build out this repertoire of really differentiated technical skills and with the kind of lens of why those technical skills are applicable outside of academia and why they're maybe exciting outside of academia. And those are kind of how we look for the talent that we want to bring into our cohort. And so I'd encourage anyone on either of those fronts to be thinking that way and really to be, when you're at a point where you're unsure of whether to take the risk or not, EF is the mechanism through which to do that. We do de-risk that earliest stage. And so we encourage anyone who, if you think you're on the cusp but aren't sure, you probably are ready for EF and it's worth applying.
I was just going to add, think big. And I think as Canadians, we often think Canada versus how do we change an industry? How do we have transformational impact? And a fundamental belief that, is one of the things that brought me to Entrepreneur First is we fundamentally believe that it matters what the most ambitious people do with their lives. And so, you know, to that person in high school, in their undergrad, you know, the prompts I would have, you know, less as EF, but more just, you know, to make impact in the world. It's think big and think transformation, because that's how we're going to progress as a society.
If someone wants to apply to Entrepreneur First, is that possible? And if so, how do they do it?
Yeah, go to joinef.com. You can see our application form there. And we're actively recruiting now for April 2020 cohort. For 2021, sorry, cohort.
Rachel Zimmer and Bogdan Konekvik of Entrepreneurs First, thank you so much for joining me tonight and talking about Entrepreneurs First, about the tech opportunities in Canada in the future, about high potential people. And if I could just close with a final couple of comments. You know, I have had the honor in the last couple of weeks of interviewing the Knowledge Society, the leaders of that, and some of the students. The first female chair of neurosurgery at UTM, the first African Canadian president of the Canadian Bar Association. You know, I could go on about some of these people, and the words that come back over and over and over again are big idea, transformational impact, passion, and stick-it-to-itness, sticking with it. And so Rachel and Bogdan have talked about some of those, and I just have to underline how critically important those are. Anyway, so that's our show for tonight. Really appreciate you joining us. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM, or you can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca, or you can get all of my video casts and podcasts after the fact at briancrombie.com. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Bogdan, for joining us. Entrepreneurs First. Sounds like it's something we should all be thinking about, being entrepreneurs. Good night, everybody.